Good evening, everyone. My name is Travis Hillen, and I'd like to welcome you to the Society of Skeletal Radiology Resident Education Club webinar. I will be serving as the moderator for this session. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Adam Zoga. He is a clinician at Thomas Jefferson University. He's been there for a long time. He's the program director of the program director of the Musculoskeletal Fellowship for 14 years. Is now program director of the combined musculoskeletal neuroradiology and advanced MRI fellowships there. He approached me a while back about doing a lecture about jobs in MSK radiology, and so that's what he's going to do. He's going to talk to us about jobs in MSK radiology and how to approach that as resident and fellow.
Yeah, it's an honor to be in front of this great group of young musculoskeletal radiologists or MSK radiologists. It's a really fulfilling career, and I think it's a great path. And I really want everyone to have a fulfilling career. And you know, as a part of our committee on the Society of Skeletal Radiology, Travis and I were talking about what is missing from radiology curricula, and you know, the job search is a daunting thing, and I feel like during residency, a lot of times residents, they're focused on, you know, getting through the examination, getting patients triaged, protocoling cases, getting the work list cleaned up, and sometimes they don't spend enough time considering their future. So I'm going to talk to you about that for about 35 minutes tonight, and then hopefully we'll have some lively questions and answers. Anyone is free to pop a question in at any time. I'll try to look. I do have the QA thing loaded on the bottom of my screen. I'm not sure if I'll see when one comes in during the talk. So I've actually been in the same place for a long time, since fellowship. So I might not be able to be the ideal candidate to talk about all the different jobs, except I've had loads of different positions at this same place. Initially, it was a hospital, then a hospital group, and now a health system. And my job has changed at least 10 times over the past 22 years. I'm still there, and my paycheck still has, well, some of the same words on top of it. But really, my career's been sort of an odyssey. It's been a lot of fun. So I want to disclose that the cases I'm going to show you, they're fictional. I made up these cases, but they're all based on real facts. So the bullet points under the cases are true. I mixed and matched a little bit to protect my colleagues, all of whom I love, my former residents, my former fellows, and some of my professional colleagues that didn't train with us. And you know, my other disclosure is I don't know everything. This isn't a scientific talk. I'm much more comfortable presenting scientific talks, and I'm much more comfortable talking about core muscle injury. But we're not going to do that tonight. We're going to talk about some of the things I've experienced, and hopefully help you create a roadmap to getting your ideal job. So my wife introduced me to this book about 5 years ago, and this has nothing to do with medicine. Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, they go around the world doing seminars on this book that was a huge success, and it's Designing Your Life. And it's really looking many years out at where you want to be, where you want to end up. And a couple of questions that I think you should consider when you search for your job are, who do I want to be? What do I want my life to look like? How do I find a job that I like or maybe even love? How do I build a career that makes me a good living? We don't have to worry about that part as much as some of the other readers. How do I balance career and family? That's a huge one. And do you want to make a difference in the world? I think most of us want to do that. So I'm going to start with a case. This person was a star resident, got a top-notch fellowship. They were a superb musculoskeletal radiology fellow. The goal was to maximize salary in a metropolitan region, not necessarily in a city, but maybe in a 75-mile radius, and get at least 50% subspecialty work. They took a job early on in the fellowship year. It was a smaller health system with 2 hospitals and an outpatient center. They had no musculoskeletal expertise at that time, and the person purchased a home in the region of the Center Hub, a nice home, went to work. 18 months after starting, there was really no musculoskeletal volume. There was no infrastructure to build it. Staffing challenges required that the radiologist move away from MSK, and they were asked to take on breast imaging. They had to become certified in breast imaging because it had been a few years since they read mammography. When they weren't doing breast imaging, they were assigned to ED shifts, body imaging, fluoro. Ultimately, they decided to leave. Okay, it's fine, they left. Here's the problem. The contract had a 2-year bonus cycle, and they lost the whole 2-year bonus. They also found out when they left that there was no tail coverage in the contract. Tail coverage is really important. You have to have that, especially if you're in a private practice. So they bought their own tail coverage. They could no longer afford the house. They lost the house, and they ultimately moved to a bunch of different private practices. Eventually landed on their feet and doing well, but it was a long stretch. So this is from Healthcare Advisory in 2018, the types of different practices in radiology. I think it's out of date 5 years later. I think really your options are corporate, physician-owned consortium, private practice, academic, or health system with an academic hub. There's a couple of others, but the vast majority of jobs fit into one of those 5 categories. Case 2, they did a fellowship geared for private practice, heavy on neuroradiology and musculoskeletal radiology, and the goal was to make as much money as possible without relocating. They were promised 50% subspecialty work. They accepted a job also early in fellowship, had a relatively, maybe a small to moderate sized private practice. It was a 3-year partnership track. 2.5 years later, they became the musculoskeletal specialists for this group, and they were very, very popular with the orthopedists, with the patients, with the sports medicine folks, with the PM&R folks. But before they became a partner, the practice sold to a corporate. The partnership opportunity was gone, like that, up in a puff of smoke. 4 years later, the new owner, the corporate owner, decreased the salary significantly. They closed many of the outpatient centers and focused on hospital contracts. The RAD staffing was trimmed, autonomy for the former partners was slashed, and now they were doing mostly emergency work and hospital-based work. So they went on to try to find a new job, no partnership. My colleague, Jason Seamus, who's a breast imager, has a book in the works called A Radiologist's Path, and it's really aimed toward medical students and even those considering medical school to learn how to choose a path in radiology. But some of the tenets from our preliminary version are soak in as much as you can during your training to learn about the business of radiology and the structure of radiology. I think it's really important. I mean, it's really important to read your textbooks. You got to read your textbooks, but it's also really important to take a few minutes every week and read the trade journals, read the JACR, read Radiology Business. I learn a lot from Radiology Business. I think it's great. And, you know, some radiology curricula have the business of radiology built in. We have a chairman's lecture series where once a month we talk about the business of radiology, but a lot of time it focuses on things like Six Sigma, process improvement, and that's all great, and it's really, really important. But it doesn't always teach you what you need to know about the structure of radiology. So your opportunity there is to sit with the senior radiologists that you work with every day at the workstation and learn from them. Most of them have stories, have experiences. Learn as much as you can. Simple dialogue. I think it's really, really important, and that's your opportunity to understand what the future of radiology might be. I think it's great to plan for a job search in your final year of residency and your fellowship year. You might get solicited early, especially in this market. If you're solicited in-house, that's great. That means that the house likes you, and it should be considered an honor. But explore all options in-house. If you're solicited outside, be careful. It might mean that you're just great, you're the best trainee ever, or it might mean that a place is a little bit desperate. Academic jobs and health system jobs tend to post much later than private practice jobs. And there's sort of a reason for that. Sometimes private practices are desperate, and sometimes private practices are set for the next 3 years and they know what they can offer. So they're more strategic. Try to envision you and your family 10 years out. Where do you want to be? What do you want from your job? Look 10 years ahead when you're picking your first job, and then target one that's likely to mature with you and grow with you. Everyone changes, but it's nice to know that your job can adapt as you evolve. Radiology is really evolving rapidly, and corporatization is a huge part of radiology today. This great white paper in the JACR from Dr. Fleischhahn is must reading. This is from back in 2019, and it's a really good read. I think all of you should look at it. Remember, so I got my MBA late in life. I'm sure many of you already have it. But the first thing you learn, the single goal of the board of directors is maximize profits to the shareholders, right? So corporate radiology practices are run by a board of directors. Their job is to maximize profits for the shareholders. This is a more recent JACR entry by Dr. Muroff, who's one of our leaders in radiology, and he really talks about venture capital and how venture capital is destined to take over more of the radiology around the world. And we'll see that. So here's a case, top recruit to a musculoskeletal fellowship. This person was from a relatively underpopulated area, sort of the south, sort of the southeast. He wanted to train in the Northeast, go back home. I should have said they. They wanted to train in the Northeast and go back home. They wanted to take their musculoskeletal expertise to provide services to a powerful ortho group that referred to the practice. They took a job early on. It seemed like an ideal job, 18-person private practice with a 3-year partnership track. Here's what happened. They were so good that the ortho practice decided they only wanted this person to read all the imaging studies. Great, very talented, very service-oriented. The problem is the remainder of the group turned on this radiologist. The ortho practice ultimately agreed to hire, but the ortho practice didn't know how to run a radiologist, a radiology business, and compensation was much less than predicted. The original group wouldn't take them back, and ultimately the original group sold to a corporate. This rad got no payout from the sale, and ended up doing telework from home, and ultimately decided to leave the region. So some lessons learned. Why are radiology practices getting bigger? It's a lot easier to function when you're bigger. Quality and safety standards, formerly MIPS and MACRA, probably can be updated. HCAPS is another word that you might hear, right? These are all showing our value, showing our quality so that we get optimal reimbursements. Well, it's easier to do that if you're a big group and you have a centralized infrastructure. Showing value is easier if you have a centralized operation that can generate the metrics that show the value. Contract negotiations for hospitals, for hospital contracts are much easier if you're big. Like IS&T platform certainly plays a role, right? It's a lot easier if we're all on the same platform, and smaller groups tend to be isolated in the IS&T world, and everything requires an interface. Every new piece of business requires an interface. Interfaces always cost money. And then there's also peaking valuations of radiology practices by corporate suitors, and I'll show you a little of that in a minute. Of course, as we get big, some hospitals, some practices go by the wayside. And this is one we published a couple of years back on the impact of, there was a hospital with a training program, a radiology training program in Philadelphia, and it closed, right? A corporate bought it. A corporate decided it would be better as residential housing, and they closed the hospital. Well, it seemed like it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It wasn't the top-rated hospital in the region, but it still served it still served a really important purpose to the population. And in the first 3 months after it closed, you can see the number of ER visits going up. This is the closest ER, and this is our other hospital ER that's 2.5 miles away, right? So the ER visits go up at the close one, even though we're trying to send patients to the other ER, which is empty. Patients aren't going there. They go to the close place. The median time to provider was bad, got worse. The line on top is how it increased. The monthly number of radiology orders didn't go up proportionally with the number of patients. It went up logarithmically, right? More studies were ordered, maybe because they were trying to waste some time before they saw the patients. The studies ordered per patient went up. And then this is the bad thing that no hospital wants to see, no administrators want to see, patients left without being seen by a provider. Well, that will decrease your star rating as a hospital, that'll decrease your reimbursement. That is a disaster. So that can happen as we get big and as we expand into different communities as health systems. So a couple of minutes on the different types of jobs you might seek. So private practices 15 years ago, and certainly when I was a fellow and a few years after, were really common in my region. They're not so common in my region in the Northeast any longer. I think there are still solitary owned private practices in lots of the country, generally the less populated areas. And it's a really attractive kind of job to get if it's stable, right? It's usually run by a president and a board of directors who often are radiologists. And there are pathways to partnership, and that's the devil in the details. You have to learn the pathway to the partnership and the likelihood that you're going to become partner, because no partnership is ever guaranteed until it's achieved. If it sells, you might lose your opportunity to become partner, and whatever you've invested might just be gone. Private practice, job in private practice really should be considered a long-term investment. You want to stick, and you want to become a partner. So I made a list of bullet points for our residents and fellows on what they should consider when they're looking at a private practice, and age of the practice and value to the community, right? The older the practice, the more likely it's going to stay. Its reputation in the community makes it more, if it's strong, it's more likely they'll get a hospital contracts. The length and stability of hospital contracts. Some hospital contracts are only 2 and 3 years. So if you're joining for a 4-year partnership track and their hospital contracts are up in 2 years, you might want to be a little wary, right? If they lose the hospital contracts, the practice could go under. And there is bidding for hospital contracts these days. As health systems get bigger, they go into small communities and they try to outbid or underbid private practices for the contracts. You want to at least be familiar with assets and debts, how much debt they have and what they own. It's a stronger practice if they own their own equipment, if they own something tangible, structural, if they own their buildings, if they own their parking garage. If they just own the name of the practice, it's not as strong of a practice. It's more viable for failure or takeover. Certainly the stability of the radiologists, the size and support systems, external threats to the practice, like an expanding health system, something to be aware of when you're signing this kind of contract. Malpractice insurance is key. I think that if you're looking at a job in private practice, you should probably have an attorney review the contract and make sure that you're covered, make sure you have tail coverage and you have adequate malpractice. I'm not sure that's always necessary for a health system or an academic job, right? So look at the small print or have someone look at the small print. Again, make sure you have tail coverage, and then really make an estimate in your own mind, make a calculated estimate of the likelihood you have of achieving partnership, because that's the goal. Then there's the corporate-owned private practices, and these are practices that have sold either to become bigger. Sometimes they're radiology practice consortia. Sometimes they're owned by VC. You should know the structure, right? The board of directors, who's on the board of directors, who's running it, who's making the calls. When it's corporate-owned, radiologists generally have less ownership of the assets, including equipment and contracts. Radiologists have more centralized support. It's easier to get your credentialing done and your MOC and things like that. They might have more flexibility and lifestyle accommodations, but the structures are incredibly variable. And remember that the board of directors rules the day. So why is there so much corporatization? Well, this is from healthcare appraisers a couple of years ago, and this is the projected people over 65 in the US, right? The percentage is going up. And then where's most imaging done? You might think about outpatient centers, but really most imaging is done in the hospital setting. So hospital contracts are really, really the backbone of of radiology revenues in most places in the country. And then there's a certificate of need status, right? So corporates are much more likely to enter areas without a certificate of need. These red states, not red states, the states that are red here have certificate of need for radiology. The others don't. So opening a new center is more difficult in those colored red. And here's our imaging procedure volume in millions over the past 10 years. It continues to go up. I think it's going up more after the pandemic. I think other clinicians are putting their hands on patients much less, and they're more likely to reflexively order imaging. I think it's going to continue to go up. You can talk about the machines taking over our jobs in another lecture. We're not going to talk about that today. I'm waiting for it to happen, but today I'm still doing bone ages and well, bone age I can use AI, but other things I'm still reading with my eyes. So this agency said the factors driving merger and acquisition activity are the fragmented market, bringing in large consolidators, benefits of scale, including the higher collections per FTE by radiologists, volume shifting to the non-hospital settings. That's a goal, but let's face it, until the outpatient reimbursement rates meet the hospital reimbursement rates, it's going to be hard to drive all patients to the outpatient centers. And then telemedicine, right? Telemedicine makes it more attractive to have a big group and run centrally. And this is just a table showing some of the largest takeovers. Look at the change from 2014 to 2022 in the value of these practices, right? The Radiology Partners takeover of Mednax is the most expensive that I found to date, although I'm probably not totally up to date. And this isn't just a US thing. RadNet acquired 75% stake in a big London-based radiology group focused on the cardiovascular system in November of 2022. So this is an international phenomenon. So an academic job, true academic jobs are really rare today. The folks going into academia to get grant support and publish papers, I think are much less common than they were 10 years ago. With true academic jobs, there's an expectation for promotion, there's an expectation for publication, and ultimately grant funding. And getting grant funding is sort of hard. I applied for multiple grants before I got a sniff of funding. Eventually you can get it, and once you get it, you know sort of how to submit grants. And there's usually an expectation of teaching. Radiologists generally don't have ownership in true academic jobs. Productivity and teaching-based positions are, both productivity and teaching-based positions are more common than just teaching-based and academic output positions. If you're interested in academics, I think it's really important that you seek some support from someone who knows how to get things published. There's loads of opportunity for residents and even med students to participate in journal editorial boards. You just apply for one, and if you don't get it, apply for another one, and there's a good chance you'll get a mentor who's on the editorial board, and you'll learn a lot about publication. And academic jobs often include support for innovation, and I'll get to innovation in a minute. And then there's this latest rage, and that's a health system with a teaching hub. So these generally have a residency program, often fellowships, often academicians, but also radiologists that are partially supported by productivity. And some of the positives for this kind of job are, one, wait till you're 2 and 3 years out of residency and you get a CME audit, right? So we all have to have CME, not the first 2 years after fellowship, but after that you do. We have to show our CME for every state license that we get. We also have to maintain our certification, and working at a place with a teaching program makes it a lot easier, because every time you go to a conference, you get a CME credit. Every time you do a review a paper, you get a CME credit. And you just keep a log, and it makes life easier. These generally come with an academic appointment. Compensation is most often based on an equation that considers both clinical productivity and teaching. But with that comes a strong retirement program, good pension programs, and generally excellent benefits. Often there's opportunities for lifestyle considerations depending on the size. I know many health systems that have radiologists who work exclusively from home or work exclusively off hours, and sometimes who work exclusively out of state in different time zones so that they can read at the busiest times of the day where the health system exists. So there's often a lot of flexibility depending on the size of the health system. FMLA is the Family Medical Leave Act. You're not guaranteed that in a private practice. It might be in the bylaws, but at most places that are associated with a medical college or an academic hub, you get FMLA for things like childbirth, death in the family, things like that. And usually there's no questions asked and you continue with pay. Things like dependent tuition reimbursement, right? So places with undergrad schools can help your kids go to college with financial support. Some positives of a health system with a teaching hub: it can be considered a more short-term commitment. Usually there's less of a restricted covenant. There's less of a non-compete, and you can usually leave with 6 months notice or something about that. All contracts are a little different, but that's generally what it is. It's an opportunity for career adaptation. So you can move to different positions within the health system. That's what I've done a lot. There are often community jobs within a health system where you get some of the benefits of being affiliated with the teaching hub, but you still work like you're in private practice and work on your own pace, and you get rewarded for your productivity. You know, being a radiologist isn't going to get you into the 1%, but being a radiologist doesn't stop you from being an innovator, right? If you have an idea and you want to bring a product to market, it's nice to be affiliated with a place that has an incubator that can help you bring it to market. And one of the great things, I think, and this is what I was doing all day today, often with health systems, physicians have a seat at the governance table. So I've been lucky enough to have a seat at the governance table in my career, and we talk about strategic planning, and we talk about acquisitions and mergers, et cetera. Then there's teleradiology, and this is the greatest opportunity for flexible shifts. You can work from anywhere. This is my colleague Bill Morrison's home workstation with his groovy tunes. You can make your money per click, and there's often quotas per shift, which you can usually meet. It's a short-term commitment. You can move. The problem is there's a lot of clinicians like patient contact and teaching, and that usually doesn't come with teleradiology. So here's the fear with working alone all the time: burnout. So we're tied with pulmonary medicine for the 7th most burned out subspecialty in the latest data that I saw. Burnout can happen from any number of causes, but certainly repetitiveness and a lack of diversity in your job can lead to burnout. So something to watch out for if you're just focused on making money. A couple of other options. There's the military. This is the USS Guam. I was the chief medical officer on the USS Guam in '95. It was dry docked in '97, and it's been sold for parts. Military has its positives. Most people that choose careers in the military did their training in the military, which obviously gets funded. There are civilian jobs in the military, and maybe some others in the group can talk more about the military. And then there's the new rage of going international, and it's intriguing. I would love the idea of traveling and reading cases and learning different cultures and reading cases for different locations. Licensure, credentialing, and privileges are always an issue. So you want to know as much as you can going in. I don't know much more about international. Case 4, this person was a star recruit to a musculoskeletal fellowship. They wanted an academic job in their home metropolitan area. They really had one city in mind. They had no job offer April 15th of the fellowship year. A little stressed, but didn't freak out. They leveraged all the help they had gotten from their mentors in residency and in fellowship, and word got out that they were looking for a job. They got great reviews, and they ultimately got the job of their dream at a health system with a major ortho service line in the city that they wanted. A few years later, they're associate professor. They're directing an outpatient imaging center in a really desirable location that gets referred to by the ortho group. They got good compensation. They get a good academic rank, and they have appointments in both radiology and orthopedics. And then they innovated and developed a startup. Now they have a patent. So a pretty good story. 2 slides from my capstone project in business school. What do we want a radiologist to be? Well, I think the 5-star diagram in the red is what we were 10 years ago. It was all about speed and low cost. And we want to migrate a little bit more toward flexibility, dependability, and quality, right? I think that's the direction radiology is headed. And this is called the 4V diagram. You want everything to the right as much as you can. Well, 10 years ago, we had low visibility, and we didn't have that much variation in what we do. We had too much variation in the output that we created. We didn't have much variety in what we do, but we had too much variation. And I think our goal is to create less variation and more visibility as a practice, as a specialty. Last couple of slides. So we did this paper based on surveys with a huge ortho group that we serve. And a couple of interesting things came of it. This is in seminars in musculoskeletal radiology. One, they said they love templated reports, but they hate the cutouts that populate the templated reports. They said they want headers, but they want the radiologists to speak their minds under the headers. So just something to keep in mind. I know every place practices differently, but I'm all for templated reports to a degree. But we have a chance to describe. And then surveying our local musculoskeletal radiologists. I listed, you don't need to know what any of these things are. These are different assignments that you might be on any given day. And I had them ranked based on service orientation, revenue potential, practice building, value added to the patient, value added to the referrer, and partnership building. And ideally, you want a diverse portfolio that includes all of this. And with a diverse portfolio where you go to a different assignment on different days of the week, it's more likely that you're going to have an interesting job. So in conclusion, what I have for your career in musculoskeletal radiology is obviously the market is wide open for you all. Design your ideal job and keep an eye for 10 years out. Leverage the experience of your mentors in residency. Ask them between cases and between readouts. Ask them where they first worked. Ask them what they think about this group or that group. Ask them what they think about corporatization. It's not all about the salary. For some people, it's all about the salary. But the harder you drive yourself, there's some good evidence that says the more likely you are to burn out. And you're not going to become one of the richest people in the world on a radiology salary. There's other ways to make money. Innovation is a better way to make money. And if you have an idea that you might want to innovate, build something, bring a product to market, it would be good to work at a place that can support that. Partnerships never guaranteed. So strategically analyze all the variables and potential jobs. Stable health system jobs tend to open later than risk-filled opportunities. Build your career to fit and augment your life, not dominate it. Last line's sort of cheesy, but I like that book. So that's what I've got. Open to questions, comments. Travis?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. There are a couple of Q&A questions so far. The first one is, how do you tell your place of fellowship you're interested in coming back as an attending? Well, I mean, for me, that was, you just tell them, right? I mean, typically you have someone that you know within that fellowship pretty well, or that's a confidant that you can say, what's the chances of me being able to come back? At least that's
I'll augment that, Travis.
Go for it.
I feel like a lot of at least in my place, a lot of the musculoskeletal attendings don't get to know the residents early on, right? Because residents are usually reading out with a couple of specific attendings on plain films. We don't get to know them that well during the limited MRI readouts that they have as residents. I think if you want to stay there, A, you tell your program director is likely to go to the chair, likely to have the chair's ear. B, you show that you want to stay there. You stay through lunch and you answer the phone. You make the extra effort to make sure that all the charts are completed. You show some leadership. I think that in health systems, we're looking for the residents who are going to be leaders, not leaders in radiology specifically, but leaders of a team, because we don't have the corporate governance, right? We are our own team. We lead from within. And I think most fellows should have the opportunity to do that. Show them that you want to be there.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, when I was I stayed at WashU, so I was an attending at WashU for about 11 years or maybe 12 years, somewhere around there before I left. But I actually signed on relatively early in residency, to do fellowship and to be an attending. Like there was back then they were hurting for attendings and stuff. So then I ended up getting a sort of a bonus to, to during my residency, to help a sign on bonus during my residency and fellowship, and that was very helpful for me back then. And I really, for the most part, liked my job in academics. Eventually I just became tired of it, I felt like I was working too hard, and my job wasn't super flexible. We were short staffed, and I just got burnt out. And then I ended up going into teleradiology, and purely MSK teleradiology, and so far that's worked out well for me. The difficulty with that again is in teleradiology, you don't have any patients that you're seeing, so you lose a fair amount of that patient, or you lose all your patient contact, which was a big part of my practice at WashU. I did a ton of procedures, and so that has been a change. And then teaching, teaching was a big part of what I did too. And I'd actually won Teacher of the Year award and things like that at WashU. And so losing that interaction was also very difficult, because I found that part of being in an academic center very rewarding, but it's also tiring, right? It's tiring, but it's also it's rewarding, but tiring, and takes a lot of effort.
I also, I should have included this in one of the slides. Staying where you know does have some other advantages. You generally, if they offer you a job, you can generally mold your job much more than if you're going to a new practice. You can say during your training, well, I want to do this, or I want to do that. And, oh, I'll cover this. So I also came on board early. I was a fellow, and they had absolutely no one to cover the ED on Christmas Day. And I said to the chair, I'm like, look, give me a bit of a forward on my attending salary, because I really need the money, and I'll sign on and become an attending. And yeah, it can help.
Yeah, I think that part of the reason I became burnt out is that I didn't mold my job. I was a sort of the jack of all trades, master of none. I could fit in everywhere and do everything, but I didn't really have my own specific niche. And I think that that can help you in academics if you have your niche, and you maybe you get to do more of the specific thing that you like to do the most. That can be very helpful. I did not do that, and that's something that I wish I would have done, is maybe spent more time developing a niche that would have maybe been better for me.
Yeah, that's another life lesson. If you're in a big health system and they ask you to do something that nobody else does, say, sure, I can do that. Then learn how to do it, and it becomes your niche.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is my niche became a lot of things that I didn't want to do, that I didn't like to do, and that was not that helped lead me to my burnout, right? Is because I didn't say no to a lot of things that I probably should have. At some point, there's this thing called the hell yes policy, right? And as a resident and a fellow, you have to say yes to everything, but at some point you have to decide what is most important to you, in your job, and most what can serve you and your job, I guess, serve you and your company that you're working for. And I just kept saying yes to everything, even if it wasn't a hell yes for me. And at some point I had taken on too much. I should have sort of pushed my way towards some of the things that made me happier in my job, and left some of the other people to take some of those other those things that weren't that interesting to me.
Great wisdom. I got an anonymous question. Are there ways to avoid being in a group that's at risk for corporate buyout? Well, and that was sort of the point of the bulleted slide, but I really think that the status in the community is huge. If a group is revered by its community, I think it's less likely to give up its name and to go to corporate buyout. I'm not saying it can't happen. And then those hospital contracts. If a group has a 10-year hospital contract, I was involved with a group that ultimately dissolved, that had an evergreen contract with the hospital. So it dissolved for other reasons. But if a group has a long hospital contract, they're likely going to be stable. So you just got to ask a lot of questions. That's the best advice I have.
Yeah, and you know the academic centers aren't going away, right? Those hospital systems aren't going to go away. So those certainly are places that you know aren't going to get bought out. But yeah, a lot of the smaller private practice groups, you don't know. You don't know. I know I've had some of my former fellows that have gotten bought out and before they became partners too, and that kind of when that happens, it's a tough situation for you for sure.
You got a question? How does cold calling a department look? I think that's entirely variable, but I wouldn't frown on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you email the if you can get an email address to the program director or something in a department that you're interested in, or if you meet somebody that at a meeting or something like that, that and you have their email address, you send them a note and say, is there a job available, or or is anything going to pop open in the near future?
Yeah, I think in this climate, you can go right to the chair. Drop an email to the chair. If they don't respond, well, then you're probably out of luck. But
there you go.
Will respond.
Yeah, I think email is the easiest way to do that, and not necessarily a phone call or something.
Agreed. How would you recommend marketing interventional MSK procedural expertise gained during fellowship? Oh, wow. I think that, yeah. Syed, maybe we can talk offline. Email me. I'm trying to leverage the expertise of my more junior colleagues who do way more ultrasound guided intervention than I was ever trained to do, and grow it into the community. And I think if you have a knowledge of the reimbursement rates for CPT codes, let me tell you, anything interventional, it's all coding based, right? So if you gain a basic knowledge of the codes that you can use to inject a tendon, to inject a major joint or a major bursa, to do a tenotomy, and then you make a simple spreadsheet that says, well, if you do this many procedures, you get this reimbursement, and oh, by the way, 25% are going to come back to your center for an MRI. I think you have a pretty solid argument. So I think interventional MSK procedural expertise is extremely valuable and becoming more valuable every day. So absolutely market it.
Yeah, I think marketing, it takes work on your part to grow that practice, right? That you have to show them that it can make money. You have to figure out what your practice is doing, and are they even doing interventions at all as a radiology practice? You have to have the space to actually do it. If you're joining a practice, you have to actually have a practice that has space to do intervention. Those can be tough, because at our fellowship at WashU, we trained. It was a big part of what we did was intervention, and most of the folks that got jobs after our fellowship went out and did things like joint injections, which were but we were doing things like vertebral augmentation and doing doing cryoablation, doing radiofrequency ablation, doing all these high-end procedures, tons of biopsies. But then as an MSK radiologist, a lot of times when you go out into a private practice, you're not going to have access to be able to do those jobs, because your interventionalists are going to be doing a lot of those things. So that's something that you have to figure out within your group that you're joining, and then talk to them about how you can grow it to grow your interventional part of that practice.
Agreed. Travis, someone asked, how early in residency is too early to commit to a group? It's a tough one.
I committed during my third year. So I was I was in my fourth year total, right? So I committed during my third year of radiology. But my circumstances were pretty stable. Like I knew I wanted to be in St. Louis. My wife was from St. Louis. All my extended family's in St. Louis. So I knew I wanted to do that. I knew I wanted to do academics to start with. And I knew that WashU was the game in town that I wanted to join. Right. So all those things pushed me to that.
So you joined someplace that was no way going away. It's
Right.
a little riskier
Exactly.
if you're joining a private practice that
Yes.
may or may not still be there. So
Yeah.
I would
Agreed.
say if you're joining a private practice early in residency, third year, fourth year of residency, even the beginning
Yeah.
of fellowship, and they really want you, that's the time to negotiate a signing bonus.
Yeah.
Get some
Um,
money up front in case something happens.
I always told residents and fellows too, if you know you want to go to a place that is very hard to get into as far as the location, a very desirable location, you should at the very least put your name, you should sort of cold call them or you should talk to them and say, look, this is who I am, this is where I'm at right now. I really want to be in this area in a couple years. Do you have any jobs available? What does the market look like out there? And how can I talk to you about possibly having a job available for me in a couple years. So getting yourself on their radar earlier in that situation, I think makes a lot of sense if you know exactly where you want to be, and there aren't that many jobs available in that market.
Yeah, and I think another question is about, is it too early to sign for an academic job in R4? And no, I think academic jobs are pretty much guaranteed. Chairs don't turn over too quickly. Generally, even if they can't, a lot of times health systems can't post jobs in time to recruit early enough for the radiology market. But I think the word of a chair is generally gold. So I think if you have the word of a chair at an academic place, at a hospital-based system with a teaching hub, I think you're pretty safe and you can feel comfortable.
Yeah. I think one thing, when I signed on as my academic job, the pay was very low, and certainly, I was probably making half of what I could have made elsewhere. And that was okay for me. I wasn't trying to make the last dollar or anything like that, but certainly it's useful to know what you're making. What are those golden handcuffs that you talked about, Adam, in your talk? Because at WashU there was a ton of golden handcuffs, and I left those on the table when I walked away. So those are things that may or may not be important to you right now, but at that point in my life, I was getting ready to start a family and stuff, and a lot of those would have been very important down the road. I just was so burnt out, I had to leave them. I left them on the table. But is R4 too early? It wasn't for me. I was an R4 when I signed my contract. Especially if you know if that's the part of the country that you want to be in, and you like your academic center. The fellowship is good. The apartment is good, and all those things sort of fit for you. Then you should. It's not too early.
Alex asked about different practices say they're going to offer X% of subspecialty reads. I don't know what a good number to aim for is. I think more than 50% gets you into societies like the Society of Skeletal Radiology, right? We're supposed to be members. We're supposed to do at least 50% subspecialty expertise. But I know these numbers are not reliable.
Yeah, they're not. They're not at all.
Like partnership, they're not guaranteed. You got to take a look under the hood, look at the structure, and see if there's glaring holes elsewhere in the department that you might get sucked into.
Yeah, because when you're not a partner, you end up getting sucked into the breast world, or you end up getting sucked into reading nothing but chest X-rays or chest CTs or body CTs and stuff. So you have to pay attention to that. I know the SSR is there'd been talk about decreasing the amount of, the percentage of MSK that you need to read and stuff like that to be a member. But, certainly if you can get 50% of your subspecialty, that's amazing. I would say, but I think that's probably a relative rarity in many private practice jobs.
Couple more, and then I got to run. Ahmed asked, is it better to go to a place where MSK does the procedures or where it's done by IR? I'm biased there. We have a great interventional program in our musculoskeletal fellowship, and I love teaching fellows kyphoplasty, vertebroplasty, RFA, or whatever FA, cryo. I love teaching it. So I think it's the spice of life to have. I have about 2 days a week where I go to an outpatient imaging center, and I see patients and do basic musculoskeletal ultrasound, and I read cases. And then I have 1 day a week where I put on the scrubs and I go in and see all the nasty things that can come into the CT guided biopsy suite, and there's a lot of nastiness. So I love having a job that varies throughout the week. So it makes your division stronger. If you're a musculoskeletal division and you do these procedures, it gives you leverage to get what you want from the health system.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think is it better to go to a place? I think it's up to you, right? Certainly some of the folks that I've worked with over the years at WashU, they didn't like doing the procedures. They really like the imaging, and that's okay, right? But you got to have folks that are able to do both in your section.
There's a question on tail coverage, and I'm not sure I have the full answer. Would you recommend having a plan to pivot to another job after X number of years, after gaining experience as an attending? I don't know the specifics, and I'm no attorney that can lecture on tail coverage, but you want to have flexibility to leave. Anything could happen. Something could happen in your family and you want to change locations. You want to have flexibility to leave and not worry about going back and getting tail coverage. So as long as it covers you so that you can leave, and so that it covers you for the statute of limitations of that particular state for malpractice, I think you're safe. But you want to have tail to cover at least that period of time, that lag time.
Yeah, and I mean, WashU, and I'm sure Thomas Jefferson, they probably have their own plan that includes tail coverage, right? Because when I left, my tail coverage was through my group. Now, that's something when you go to wherever you're going to go to get your job, that's something that you need to figure out, because I don't know what the numbers are, but it's a pretty high number of folks that do not stay in their original job for the majority of their career, right? And most folks leave their job after a couple of years. So you want to at least to know what the tail coverage situation is.
All right. I'll try to type answers to the last few. I have a padel match, and they're waiting for me.
Cool. I can stay on for a little bit longer, Adam, and I can answer some of these questions. That's no big deal. You should run away, do your thing. It's been fun. I'll answer a couple more of these, and then I'll let everyone else out of here. Sound good?
Thanks, Travis.
Yeah, take care, Adam. Okay, so is there a typical or preferred chronological sequence of jobs taken after training? I don't know that there is a specific answer to this. I went to academic immediately after training, and most people that do academic right after training. Although there were a couple of folks in my group that joined a little bit later that went from private practice then back to academic. But I think in general, it's harder to come from private practice to academic than going directly from training into an academic job. It's typically easier to do that scenario than coming back from private practice. Next one, what resources do you recommend to get more information on reimbursement rates for interventional MSK procedures that you want to introduce into your group practice? This is one that I'm not super aware of. I mean, so you have to go and look at the CPT codes to try to figure out what the reimbursement are, but I don't know what the best resource is for that, unfortunately. Maybe somebody else could weigh in on that in the participants chat, but unfortunately I don't know the answer to that one well. What other suggestions do you have to avoid early career burnout? Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, I wasn't really burned out early in my career. My first 6 or 7 years of being an attending were pretty good. I felt like then the job became much busier, my life became much busier, and I just got overwhelmed. And that is partly what led to my burnout, is I just got overwhelmed by my life at home and my life at work. So avoiding early career burnout, I think some of the things that can help with that are having a balanced life. So having balance at work. I was working 12-hour days. I wouldn't, or 11-hour days. I wouldn't recommend that. And that I was doing that because that's what I did. It wasn't like that was required of me. That was just something that I did, and it's something that I shouldn't have done. I shouldn't have allowed that to happen to me. But I'm a hard worker by nature, so I just kept working when I should have really just worked my 8 or 9 hours and went home and spent time with my family. I also had 4 young kids in my house at the same time, and that certainly is stressful. So adding the long days plus coming home to long nights with lots of kids, that just sort of made things pretty tough for me. I wasn't taking care of myself, meaning wasn't exercising, wasn't doing things outside of work, outside of my home life to try to help me to be more healthy, like exercising, going, hanging out with friends, those sort of things. It was just basically work and home. So I think some of the best things that you can do to avoid early career burnout are really to have good balance in your life. Having a good home life and having a good work balance, and plus taking care of yourself, doing your exercising, and spending time with friends. Those are all things that can be very helpful to help avoid career burnout. Also, there are counselors, right? A lot of academic centers actually have counselors that are part of your job. You have access to them for free to help you, to help avoid burnout. So let's see, any other questions that haven't been touched on? Explore academics or private practice first after fellowship. We sort of talked about that one already. So I think at this point we've hit all of them. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for the question about reimbursement rates for interventional MSK procedures. If you are in an academic, if you're a resident right now or a fellow right now, typically there is someone in your group that knows about those MSK procedure CPT codes and rates that you bill for those kind of things, and they would be a good resource for that. Okay. All right. So I think that's probably it. Thank you all for non-radiologist providers' role in the MSK world, for good or bad. Non-radiologist providers' role in the MSK world, for good or bad. So I assume what you're talking about are things, folks like PAs doing procedures, and certainly or physician extenders doing procedures and things like that, and certainly that is a big part of what has been going on. It came into our practice at WashU when I was there in the last couple of years that I was there, helping to see patients on an inpatient basis, helping to see them as outpatient and getting them ready for procedures. Some of them do injections of joints. Certainly it can help the radiologist go further, because then they're doing some of the tasks that take you away from doing your reading MRIs and doing other more difficult procedures. So they do have their place. Certainly, if they took over the entire MSK world, that would be a bummer, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So anyway, thanks to everyone that have joined and have taken part in this discussion with Dr. Zoga and I. The next lecture, the residency lecture, is on October 18th, and it's Interesting Knee Cases by Haley Allen.